My name is Teresa, and I'm 58 years old. 3 weeks ago, I watched my entire world burn to the ground in a matter of hours. Standing barefoot on the cold pavement at 2 in the morning, watching flames devour the home where I'd raised my son and buried my husband, I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. The real fire started when I knocked on my son's door, desperate and broken, only to discover that the child I'd sacrificed everything for had become a stranger. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about motherhood, family, and finding strength when you've lost it all. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt let down by someone you trusted most, and don't forget to subscribe because this journey is just beginning. Now, let me take you back to that terrible night that became the best thing that ever happened to me. I never imagined I'd be starting over at 58. After my husband Robert passed away 3 years ago, I'd settled into a quiet routine in our little two-bedroom house on Maple Street in suburban Denver. The mortgage was paid off, the garden was blooming with the roses Robert had planted for our 20th anniversary, and every corner held memories of the life we'd built together over 25 years. My relationship with my son Marcus had become comfortable but distant since he moved out for college 14 years ago. We'd talk every Sunday evening, and he'd visit maybe once a month, usually staying just long enough for dinner and polite conversation. At 32, he'd built a successful career as a software engineer, lived in a sleek downtown apartment, and seemed to have his life figured out. I was proud of him, even if I sometimes felt like we were friendly acquaintances rather than mother and son. 8 months ago, Marcus started bringing Jessica to our occasional dinners. She was 28, a corporate lawyer with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive wardrobe. During our first meeting, she spent most of the evening checking her phone and making subtle comments about the neighborhood being quaint and my homemade lasagna being interesting. I tried to like her because Marcus seemed happy, but something about her cold demeanor made me uncomfortable. The second time we met, she barely spoke to me directly, addressing all her comments through Marcus, as if I weren't sitting right there. I told myself it didn't matter. Marcus was an adult, and if Jessica made him happy, I could learn to accept her. I just wished she'd show a little more warmth, maybe ask about my volunteer work at the local elementary school, or express some interest in the family photos covering my mantelpiece. But I kept my concerns to myself, not wanting to be the interfering mother-in-law stereotype. The night of October 15th started like any other. I'd spent the evening reading in my favorite armchair, the one Robert used to tease me about because it was so worn, the stuffing showed through the arms. I'd fallen asleep there around 11, my book still open on my lap. The smoke alarm's piercing shriek jolted me awake at exactly 2:07 in the morning. The smell hit me immediately, thick and acrid, burning my throat. Black smoke was already filling the hallway, and I could see orange light flickering from the direction of the kitchen. My heart hammered as I stumbled toward the front door, wearing nothing but my cotton nightgown and slippers. The heat was incredible, like standing too close to an oven, and I could hear the terrible crackling sound of my life going up in flames. I barely made it to the front yard before the living room windows exploded outward, showering glass across the lawn. Neighbors were already gathering. Someone had called the fire department, and Mrs. Patterson from next door wrapped a blanket around my shoulders as we watched the flames consume everything I owned. The firefighters arrived within 12 minutes, but it was already too late. They managed to contain the blaze before it spread to neighboring houses, but my home was a total loss. Electrical fire, the fire chief told me, as dawn broke over the smoldering ruins. Probably started in the old wiring behind the kitchen wall. These houses from the 70s, the electrical systems aren't built for all the modern appliances. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing salvageable. Standing there in my nightgown and borrowed blanket, looking at the blackened skeleton of my house, I felt completely lost. My insurance would eventually cover the damages, but that would take weeks to process. I had no clothes except what I was wearing. No identification, no money, no phone. Everything was gone. Robert's books, our wedding photos, the quilt his mother had made for our first anniversary. Marcus's baby pictures. 25 years of memories reduced to ash and twisted metal. The Red Cross volunteer who arrived that morning was kind but practical. "Do you have family nearby, Mrs. Henderson? Somewhere you can stay while we sort this out?" she asked, clipboard in hand. "My son," I said automatically. "My son lives downtown. He'll help me." At that moment, I had no doubt Marcus would open his arms and his home to me. Despite our growing distance, I was still his mother. I'd sat by his bedside through every childhood illness, worked double shifts to pay for his college tuition, and celebrated every achievement. Surely, when I showed up broken and desperate, he'd remember the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give him the best life possible. The taxi ride to Marcus's apartment took 45 minutes through the early morning traffic. The driver, a middle-aged Hispanic man named Carlos, was incredibly kind. When he saw my condition and heard what had happened, he refused to let me pay the fare and gave me his jacket to wear over the thin hospital scrubs the Red Cross had provided. "You take care of yourself, lady," he said as he helped me out at Marcus's building. "Family's supposed to be there when you need them most." His words gave me hope as I rode the elevator to the 15th floor. Marcus lived in one of those modern high-rise buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman. I'd only visited twice before, both times feeling out of place among the sleek furniture and expensive artwork. But today, I just needed my son. I needed him to hold me and tell me everything would be okay, the way I'd done for him countless times when he was small. Standing outside apartment 1512, I smoothed down my hair and tried to compose myself. It was almost 5 in the morning, and I hated waking him, but this was an emergency. Surely he'd understand. I pressed the doorbell and waited, my heart pounding with anticipation and relief. Finally, I was going to be safe. The door opened after several long minutes, and Marcus appeared in a white t-shirt and gray pajama pants, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles. His face showed confusion and annoyance rather than concern, and he blinked at me as if trying to process why I was standing in his hallway at 5 in the morning. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice groggy but not welcoming. He didn't invite me in, didn't ask if I was okay, just stood there blocking the doorway like I was some unexpected delivery he didn't want to accept. "Marcus, honey, there was a fire," I began, my voice shaking as the reality of the night caught up with me. "The house burned down. Everything's gone. I have nowhere else to go." I waited for him to reach out to pull me into a hug to express shock and sympathy. Instead, he glanced back toward his bedroom and ran his hand through his hair, looking more frustrated than concerned. "Mom, this is really bad timing," he said, his voice low but clearly irritated. "Jessica has an important presentation tomorrow morning. She needs her sleep, and we can't have any drama right now." Drama? I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. My home had burned down 6 hours ago, and he was worried about drama. "Marcus, I'm not trying to cause problems. I just need somewhere to stay until I can figure things out. Maybe just for a few days while the insurance people—" "Can't you stay at a hotel?" he interrupted, pulling his phone from his pocket. "I can give you some money. There's a nice Holiday Inn about 10 minutes from here. You'd probably be more comfortable there anyway." The words hit me like a physical blow. More comfortable in a hotel than with my own son. I searched his face for any sign of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when I left him at kindergarten, who'd called me his best friend until he turned 13. But this man looking back at me was a stranger. "Marcus, I'm your mother," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "My house burned down. I have nothing left. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" His jaw tightened, and I could see him getting more agitated. "Of course it means something, but you can't just show up here expecting us to drop everything. Jessica is under a lot of pressure at work right now. The last thing she needs is house guests and family complications." Family complications. That's what I was to him now. Not his mother who'd raised him alone after his father died when he was 12. Not the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for his engineering degree. Just a complication. Before I could respond, I heard movement from inside the apartment, and Jessica appeared behind Marcus, wearing a silk nightgown that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and even without makeup, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But her expression when she saw me was pure annoyance. "Marcus, I told you I have the Morrison case tomorrow," she said, not even bothering to acknowledge my presence. "I need my sleep. This is exactly the kind of thing we talked about." She looked at me, then her blue eyes cold and dismissive, taking in my borrowed scrubs and Carlos's oversized jacket. I could see her calculating something behind those eyes, weighing whether I was worth the inconvenience. "Handle this quickly," she said to Marcus, then turned and walked back toward the bedroom without another word. Not, I'm sorry about your house, or are you hurt? Just instructions to her boyfriend about how to dispose of his troublesome mother as efficiently as possible. I watched her disappear down the hallway and something inside me broke. Not just from her rudeness, but from the way Marcus watched her go with obvious deference. This woman who'd known him for 8 months had more influence over his decisions than the mother who'd raised him for 32 years. Marcus turned back to me, and I could see his resolve hardening. Whatever internal struggle he might have felt was over. Jessica had spoken, and he'd made his choice. "Mom, you can't stay here," he said, his voice firm and final. "Jessica is right. She's stressed enough with this case, and having you here would just make things worse for everyone. Make things worse." I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Marcus, I'm not asking for a vacation. I'm homeless. I have literally nowhere else to go." "That's not my fault," he snapped, and I saw something ugly flash across his features. "You always do this, Mom. You make everything about you. You show up with your problems and expect everyone else to fix them." The accusation was so unfair, so completely wrong, that I actually stepped backward. When had I ever asked him for anything? When had I made my problems his responsibility? I'd been independent since Robert died. Maybe to a fault. I'd never asked Marcus for money, never demanded his time, never imposed on his life in any way. "I raised you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "When your father died and left us with nothing, I worked 60 hours a week to keep food on the table and pay for your college. I never asked you for anything, not once. And now when I have nothing left, you can't spare me a couch for a few nights." "That was your choice," he said coldly. "Nobody asked you to sacrifice everything, and just because you made those choices doesn't mean I owe you anything now." The words were like a knife to my chest. Nobody asked me to sacrifice everything. Nobody asked me to work double shifts as a waitress and a house cleaner so he could go to engineering school instead of community college. Nobody asked me to give up dating, give up my own dreams, give up any chance at happiness so he could have everything he wanted. "Jessica doesn't want you here," he continued, his voice getting louder. "And honestly, neither do I right now. You're just going to cause problems between us, and I'm not going to let that happen." "I would never cause problems between you," I protested, but even as I said it, I knew it didn't matter. He'd already decided I was the problem. "You already are causing problems just by being here," he said, moving closer to the door. "Look, I'll transfer some money to your account tomorrow, find a hotel, get some clothes, and figure out your next move. But you can't stay here." He was actually going to send me away. My own son, the child I'd devoted my life to raising, was choosing his girlfriend of 8 months over his mother who'd lost everything. I searched his face one more time, hoping to find some trace of the boy I'd loved so completely, but all I saw was a stranger who wanted me gone. "Please, Marcus," I whispered, hating how desperate I sounded, but unable to stop myself. "I'm your mother. I have nowhere to go." "You'll figure it out," he said, and then he stepped back and began closing the door. "You always do." The door clicked shut, and I heard the deadbolt turn. I stood there for several minutes staring at the brushed steel surface, waiting for it to open again. Waiting for Marcus to realize what he'd done and invite me in. Waiting for some sign that the son I'd raised still existed somewhere inside that apartment. But the door stayed closed, and eventually I turned and walked back to the elevator on unsteady legs. As the numbers descended from 15 to ground level, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The desperate need for his approval, the hope that we could rebuild our relationship, the guilt over every parenting mistake I'd ever made, it all seemed to drain away, leaving behind something harder and cleaner. By the time I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I wasn't the same woman who'd knocked on his door 30 minutes earlier. That woman had been broken and desperate, willing to beg for scraps of affection from a son who clearly didn't value her. This woman walking away was angry, yes, but also strangely liberated. The morning sun was beginning to rise over downtown Denver as I walked aimlessly through the empty streets. I had nowhere to go and no plan, but for the first time in hours, I wasn't panicking. Instead, I felt a strange sort of clarity settling over me, like the way the air feels clean and sharp after a storm. I found myself in Civic Center Park and sat down on a bench near the fountain. The early morning joggers were starting to appear, and I watched them pass by with their purposeful strides and expensive athletic wear. They had places to be, people depending on them, lives that mattered. For a moment, I envied their certainty. Then I thought about my own life. Really thought about it for the first time in years. Since Robert's death, I'd been drifting, filling my days with small routines and quiet activities, living for Marcus's Sunday phone calls and occasional visits. I'd made his happiness the center of my world, even though he'd made it clear years ago that I wasn't the center of his. Sitting there in Carlos's borrowed jacket, wearing hospital scrubs and flip-flops, I realized I'd been living like a ghost for the past 3 years. I'd been so afraid of being alone, so desperate to maintain the illusion of a close relationship with Marcus, that I'd forgotten who I was before I became his mother. I'd been Teresa once, not just Marcus's mom or Robert's widow. I'd had dreams and ambitions and friends of my own. Helen's face popped into my mind suddenly. Helen Rodriguez, my roommate from college, who'd moved to Portland after graduation and had been sending me Christmas cards for 37 years. Her last card had included a note saying her husband had passed away the year before and inviting me to visit any time. I'd meant to call her after Robert died, but somehow I'd never found the courage. Now, sitting on this park bench with nothing left to lose, it seemed like exactly the right time. I found a payphone outside a coffee shop that was just opening and called Collect. Helen's voice was exactly the same, warm and slightly raspy from years of teaching high school Spanish. When I told her what had happened, she didn't hesitate for even a second. "Get on a bus and come here," she said firmly. "Today. Right now. I've got plenty of room and Portland's beautiful this time of year. You can stay as long as you need to figure things out." "Helen, I don't want to be a burden," I started, but she cut me off. "Burden, Teresa, you're giving me a chance to help an old friend. Besides, I could use the company. This house gets pretty quiet with just me and my cat." Something inside my chest unclenched for the first time since I'd smelled smoke the night before. Here was Helen, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, offering me exactly what my own son had refused. No conditions, no time limits, no concerns about inconvenience. Just simple human kindness. "Are you sure?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm sure. There's a Greyhound station downtown, right? The afternoon bus gets here around 9 tonight. I'll pick you up." After I hung up, I used the cash the Red Cross had given me to buy a cup of coffee and a muffin from the shop. The young barista, probably around Marcus's age, noticed my unusual attire and asked if I was okay. When I explained about the fire, she refused to let me pay and threw in a chocolate chip cookie for the road. The kindness of strangers was overwhelming. Carlos, the taxi driver, the barista Helen on the phone, even the Red Cross volunteers had shown me more care in the past 8 hours than my own son had managed. It made me realize how low my expectations had become, how little I'd been asking for from the people who should have loved me most. The bus station was a 40-minute walk through downtown Denver, and I used the time to think about what came next. Not just the logistics of rebuilding my life, but the emotional work of accepting who Marcus really was. Not the grateful, loving son I'd imagined, but a grown man who prioritized his girlfriend's convenience over his mother's crisis. Not the boy who'd once promised to take care of me when I got old, but someone who saw me as an obligation at best. It hurt, but it was also freeing. I'd spent 3 years since Robert's death trying to maintain a relationship that existed more in my memory than in reality. I'd been calling Marcus every Sunday, sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts, visiting when invited, all while pretending we were close. But we weren't close. We were polite strangers who happened to share DNA. The afternoon bus to Portland was half empty, and I managed to get a window seat near the back. As Denver fell away behind us and the landscape opened up into mountains and forests, I felt like I was shedding an old skin. The Teresa, who'd raised Marcus, who'd defined herself primarily as his mother, was staying behind in that apartment building where he'd closed the door in my face. Portland in October was exactly as Helen had described it, beautiful and crisp, with leaves turning golden in the afternoon light. She was waiting for me at the bus station, 60 years old now, but still recognizable as the young woman who'd talked me through my first heartbreak and helped me study for organic chemistry. Her hair was completely gray, cut short and practical, and she wore jeans and a University of Oregon sweatshirt. When she saw me, she opened her arms without hesitation. "Oh, Teresa," she said, holding me tight. "I'm so sorry about everything, but I'm so glad you're here." Helen's house was a small craftsman bungalow in southeast Portland, surrounded by maple trees and a garden that looked professionally maintained. Inside, it was warm and cluttered in all the best ways, with bookshelves covering every wall and a fat orange cat named Hemingway, who immediately decided I was acceptable. "The guest room's all yours for as long as you want it," Helen said, showing me a sunny room with a double bed and a desk by the window. "I know this isn't how you plan to start over, but maybe it's exactly what you needed." Over the next few weeks, I began to understand what she meant. Without the constant low-level anxiety about Marcus's approval, without the need to arrange my life around his schedule and preferences, I discovered I actually liked myself quite a bit. Helen and I fell back into our old rhythm of long conversations over coffee and friendly arguments about books and politics. I found a part-time job at the local branch library, something I'd always wanted to try but had never pursued while I was focused on being the perfect mother. The work was engaging and the staff was welcoming, especially the head librarian, a woman named Margaret, who'd raised 3 kids as a single mother and understood the particular challenge of rebuilding your identity after your children leave home. "The hardest part," Margaret told me one afternoon as we processed returned books, "is realizing that all that sacrifice was supposed to teach them to be independent, not eternally grateful. Success in parenting means they don't need you anymore, but nobody tells you how to handle that when it actually happens." I also started volunteering at a local preschool, reading stories to 4-year-olds who listened with the kind of rapt attention I remembered from Marcus's childhood. Working with children again reminded me why I'd become a teacher in the first place before marriage and motherhood had redirected my career into safer, more stable paths. 6 weeks into my new life, I met David Chen at the library's monthly book club. He was 62, a retired high school principal whose wife had died of cancer 2 years earlier. Like me, he was learning to build a life around his own interests rather than someone else's needs. He was thoughtful and funny, and when he asked me to dinner after our discussion of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I said yes without hesitation. David didn't need me to be anyone other than who I was. He wasn't looking for a mother figure or someone to fix his problems. He wanted a companion, someone to share books and movies and long walks through Portland's neighborhoods. It was refreshing to be wanted for my company rather than my usefulness. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening in December, 3 months after the fire. I was making dinner in Helen's kitchen, listening to NPR and feeling more content than I'd been in years. When I saw his name on Helen's caller ID, my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Mom." His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that took me back to his teenage years. "Hello, Marcus," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "How are you?" "I'm okay. I'm not okay. Jessica and I broke up last month. She said I was too dependent on you, which is crazy because I barely even talk to you. But then she said some other things, and I started thinking about the night you came here, and I realized I was a complete ass." I waited, not rushing to reassure him the way I once would have. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I know I hurt you, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix it, but I want you to know that I regret everything about that night. You needed me, and I failed you completely." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." The silence stretched between us, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I was hoping maybe you'd come back to Denver," he said finally. "I know your house is gone, but I thought maybe we could look for a place together, or you could stay with me until you find something. I want to make this right." The offer that would have filled me with joy 3 months earlier now left me completely unmoved. "I appreciate the apology, Marcus, but I'm not coming back to Denver." "But, Mom, where else would you go? All your friends are here and your life—" "My life is here now," I interrupted. "In Portland. I have a job, friends, a man I care about. I'm happy here." "A man?" He sounded genuinely shocked, as if the idea of me having a romantic life had never occurred to him. "His name is David, and he's wonderful. He treats me like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings are important. It's been a nice change." Another long silence. "Mom, I know I messed up, but you're my mother. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything, Marcus. That's why your rejection hurt so much. But I learned something important these past few months. Being your mother doesn't mean I have to accept being treated poorly. You taught me that I deserve better." I could hear him starting to cry, and my heart squeezed with familiar maternal sympathy. but I didn't take back my words or rush to comfort him. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I love you, I said softly. I always will, but I won't come running every time you decide you need me. You made your choice that night, and now I've made mine. It's been 8 months now since the fire, and I can honestly say it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not the trauma of losing my home or the pain of Marcus's rejection, but the way it forced me to examine what I'd built my life around and whether it was serving me. I'm still in Portland, still working at the library, still volunteering with the preschoolers who call me Miss Teresa and fight over who gets to sit closest during story time. David and I are taking things slowly, but we've started talking about maybe finding a place together next year. Not because either of us needs saving, but because we genuinely enjoy building something new together. Helen and I have become closer than we ever were in college. She's taught me to garden, and I've taught her to make Robert's famous chili recipe. We've traveled to the coast together, joined a hiking group for women over 50, and started a small investment club with 6 other friends. I'm more social now than I've been in years, more engaged with the world around me. Marcus and I talk every few weeks now, but it's different. I don't ask about his love life, and he doesn't offer advice about mine. We discuss books, current events, his work projects. It's cordial, but not particularly warm. I think he's still hoping I'll soften and come back to the relationship we had before, but I won't. That relationship was built on my neediness and his guilt, and it wasn't healthy for either of us. Last month, he sent me a card for my 59th birthday with a note saying he missed me and hoped I was happy. I sent back a photo of David and me at Crater Lake with a note saying I was very happy and hoped he was learning to be happy too. I meant it. I want him to build a life based on what brings him joy, not what he thinks he owes me or anyone else. The other day, a young mother at the preschool where I volunteer was telling me about her struggles with her teenage son, how she felt like she was losing him as he became more independent. I told her what I wish someone had told me years ago, that raising children means teaching them not to need you. The goal isn't to create grateful dependents, but capable adults who choose to include you in their lives because they want to, not because they have to. But what if they don't choose you? She asked, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Then you build a life worth living without them, I said. You remember who you were before you became their mother, and you become that person again, only wiser. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a mother was losing her child's love. Now I know the worst thing is losing yourself in the desperate attempt to keep it. Love that has to be earned through constant sacrifice and self-denial isn't really love at all. It's a transaction, and like any transaction, it can end when the terms change. Marcus taught me something valuable that night when he closed the door in my face. He taught me that I am not responsible for his happiness, his choices, or his gratitude. I am responsible for my own life, my own choices, my own path forward. It took losing everything to learn that lesson, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who set us free. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. And sometimes the best gift we can give our children is showing them what it looks like to choose yourself to build a life based on your own values rather than other people's expectations. I still think about that night sometimes, standing in that hallway in borrowed clothes, begging my son for shelter. But I don't feel angry anymore or even particularly sad. I feel grateful. That fire burned away more than just my house. It burned away the illusion that my worth was tied to Marcus's approval, that my happiness depended on his presence in my life. I learned to live for myself, not for anyone else's approval or affection. And that, it turns out, is the most liberating lesson of all. What would you have done if your own child turned you away in your darkest hour? Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and someone's approval? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe for more real stories about finding strength when life tests you most. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to start over, and that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of something better. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you are stronger than you know and worthy of love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself to receive it. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.